Every empire swears its money will last forever. Every generation believes its dollar, its pound, its franc will remain unshakable. But history whispers a darker truth. Every currency dies when trust runs out. And for the United States dollar, that whisper is getting louder. For nearly 80 years, the US dollar has ruled the world. It's been the language of trade, the oil in global commerce, the standard that every nation measures itself against. When America sneezes, the world catches a cold. When the dollar moves, markets tremble. But what happens when the world begins to question that trust? What happens when the dollar, the foundation of the global economy, starts showing cracks? To understand the storm that might be coming, we have to go back to where the empire of green paper began. It's 1944. World War II is tearing the world apart. Nations are broke, economies are shattered, and confidence in currencies has collapsed. Out of this chaos, 730 delegates from 44 countries gather in a small resort town in New Hampshire, Bretton Woods. Their goal? Rebuild the global financial system and ensure stability. The solution? Tie every major currency to the US dollar and tie the dollar to gold. The deal made sense. America had 2/3 of the world's gold reserves, its economy was booming, and its military dominated. The dollar wasn't just a currency, it was a promise, a symbol of stability, and the world believed it. But belief is fragile, and promises have limits. By the late 1960s, that faith was cracking. The US was spending billions on the Vietnam War, funding social programs at home, and printing more dollars than it had gold to back them. Foreign governments, especially France under Charles de Gaulle, started asking for real gold instead of paper promises. And then came 1971. In a single shocking announcement, President Richard Nixon severed the dollar's link to gold. Overnight, the dollar was no longer backed by anything tangible. The world had entered the era of fiat money, value based on trust, not metal. At first, it worked. America's economic dominance kept the dollar strong. Oil was priced in dollars, global trade continued, and countries held U.S. treasuries as reserves. But beneath the surface, something had changed forever. The dollar had become an empire of belief. Powerful, yes, but built on confidence alone. Every empire has its warning signs. Rome had inflation and debased coins. Britain had debt and war fatigue. And the United States? It has debt, inflation, and rising competition. The first tremors came quietly. China and Russia began trading outside the dollar. Nations in the Middle East discussed selling oil in yuan. BRICS, an alliance of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, started exploring a new reserve currency. Slowly, the dollar's monopoly began to erode. But here's the twist most people miss. The dollar's biggest threat isn't another currency. It's the United States itself. Every time Washington raises the debt ceiling, prints trillions to stimulate the economy, or weaponizes the dollar through sanctions, it chips away at global confidence. Nations remember what happened to Russia's reserves when sanctions froze them. If that can happen to one, it can happen to anyone. And quietly, countries are preparing. Central banks have been buying gold at record levels, moving away from dollars. They're not shouting it from rooftops, but the numbers tell the story. Since 2018, central bank gold purchases have surged to the highest levels in modern history. Why? Because gold doesn't lie. Gold doesn't need trust. Gold is the antidote to paper promises. But that raises the question, if trust in the dollar fades, what replaces it? Digital gold like Bitcoin? Physical gold? A new BRICS-backed system? The answer might define the next century. And the clues are already around us. Look at the inflation spikes after 2020. Look at America's $34 trillion national debt. Look at how each crisis, 2008, 2020, 2023, has been met with the same medicine. Print more money, flood the system with liquidity, and hope people keep believing. It's the same pattern every empire follows before the fall. At first, the printing feels like salvation. Then it becomes dependency. And finally, it destroys the very trust it was meant to preserve. As history shows, the real collapse doesn't happen when money loses value. It happens when people lose faith. And that's the point where the story of the dollar empire is heading. But before we talk about the future, about what could actually replace the dollar, and how ordinary Americans can protect themselves when trust runs out, let's go deeper, because the blueprint for the dollar's downfall has already been written. We've seen it before. In Rome, in France, in Britain. The cycle repeats. And in part 2, you'll see exactly how it ends, and how you can prepare before it does. Trust is the invisible foundation of money. When that foundation cracks, collapse happens fast, faster than anyone expects. And the US dollar, for all its power, is standing on a foundation built on debt, printing, and promises. To understand how fragile that is, let's look at what happens when trust breaks, because history has given us front-row seats to financial implosions before. In the early 20th century, Britain ruled the world with the pound sterling. It was the global reserve currency, accepted everywhere from India to South America. But after 2 world wars and a mountain of debt, Britain began to fade. The pound's strength evaporated, and by 1945, it was clear. The financial empire had shifted west, to the dollar. Now, nearly 80 years later, the same signs are appearing again, but this time in Washington, not London. America's debt-to-GDP ratio has crossed 120%. Interest payments alone are nearing $1 trillion a year. Foreign demand for U.S. bonds is weakening. And as countries diversify their reserves, the dollar's share of global holdings has quietly slipped below 59%, the lowest in modern history. These aren't small numbers, they're signals. But here's where the story gets more dangerous. For the first time, technology has given the world alternatives. Digital currencies, gold-backed trade systems, and even Bitcoin are forming a parallel economy. When people lose faith in paper, they look for code or for metal. And that's not theory. It's already happening. In 2023, BRICS nations launched cross-border payment systems that bypass the dollar entirely. In Asia and the Middle East, central banks are stockpiling gold instead of U.S. treasuries. And in America itself, more people are buying gold and digital assets than at any time since the 1970s. But remember, this isn't just economics. It's psychology. The moment a critical mass of people believes the dollar is no longer safe, the system starts to unravel. Slowly at first, then suddenly. Inflation is the first warning. You've already felt it at the grocery store, the gas pump, the rent check. Your dollars buy less, and no one can explain why prices never really fall back. That's trust decay, disguised as cost of living. The second warning is de-dollarization. You'll see headlines about countries moving away from the dollar, and it'll sound distant, irrelevant. But those small shifts mean less demand for dollars abroad, and over time, that translates to less stability at home. The third warning is what happens in every empire's final chapter: desperation. When confidence fades, governments reach for control. Capital restrictions, bank freezes, temporary emergency measures. We've seen it before, from Argentina to Lebanon to even Cyprus. Each time, ordinary people wake up to find that the money they thought was theirs isn't. So, what happens when trust runs out in the dollar empire? The transition won't be cinematic. There won't be a single day when the dollar collapses. It will be a gradual erosion, a slow transfer of power. Global trade will shift to multi-currency systems. The dollar will still exist, but it will no longer dominate. Its power will shrink, and with it, America's ability to fund its debt effortlessly will fade. For everyday Americans, that means one thing: higher prices, higher taxes, and lower real wealth. But there's another side to the story, a side that history shows can turn chaos into opportunity. Every collapse creates survivors, and the survivors aren't the ones who trusted most. They're the ones who prepared first. In the 1970s, when inflation raged and confidence in the dollar plunged, those who held gold preserved their wealth. In 2008, those who kept liquidity instead of leverage came out stronger. In 2020, those who diversified into digital gold, Bitcoin, watched their assets multiply as trust in the system weakened. The pattern is clear. When the system shakes, real value, things you can touch or verify, wins. That doesn't mean sell everything and buy gold. It means understand the game you're in. The dollar's strength comes from faith, and faith can vanish overnight. Diversify. Hold assets that governments can't print. Learn history, because it's not just repeating, it's warning you. The next financial empire won't be decided by tanks or treaties. It will be decided by trust. And when that trust finally runs out, the world won't end. It will reset. Because collapse isn't the end of money. It's the end of illusion. The question is, will you be holding paper or something real? This is educational, not financial advice. Do your own research. If this gave you a new way to see what's coming, then don't just watch history. Understand it. Subscribe to Hidden Finance File, where we uncover the secrets behind money, power, and survival in a world built on trust. Stay alert. Stay informed. And remember, every empire falls, but wisdom survives.